All right, so today I want to talk about Aristotle's artistic proofs, and they are ethos, pathos, and logos, and it comes from his work, the Nicomachean Ethics. And I mean, you can't say enough about Aristotle as an influence on Western thought. He was a student of Plato, and he was a tutor to Alexander the Great, and he lived roughly 4 centuries or so before Christ. And we have about what is assumed a third of his work or so that survived to the modern day, and it's handed down in terms of papyrus scrolls that have been kind of translated and edited. And this is about the artistic proofs, right? This notion of ethos, pathos, and logos, and kind of answers the question, what makes a speaker credible? So, of the modes of persuasion furnished by the spoken word, there are three kinds. The first kind depends on the personal character of the speaker. The second, on putting the audience into a certain frame of mind. The third, on the proof or apparent proof provided by the words of the speech itself. Right. So, the the first kind depends on the personal character of the speaker. That is ethos. Ethos, ethos. The second, on putting the audience into a certain frame of mind. That is pathos, pathos, and it's synonymous with emotion or psychology. The third, on the proof or apparent proof provided by the words of the speech itself. That is logos, logos, and it means logic, but it means a lot more than logic. When you think of logos, you think of logic, but it means rational reasoning and understanding, and this sort of movement from the self in comprehension, like through logic into the sciences and mathematics as well. Aristotle continues. He says, persuasion is achieved by the speaker's personal character when the speech is so spoken as to make us think him credible, right? So credible means believable. And I have in parentheses ethos, right? This is the artistic proof of ethos. Aristotle continues. He says, we believe good men more fully and more readily than others. This is true generally, whatever the question is, and absolutely true where exact certainty is impossible and opinions are divided. Right. And so this idea of sort of whom do we believe and about what, and Aristotle says that, right, credibility is this sort of form where we kind of recognize the good personal character of the other, and that's why we're willing to buy pickup trucks that are advertised by Aaron Rodgers, or because we like Aaron Rodgers and his kind of persona rubs off on the pickup truck, and there's just something about one's ability to what kind of judge the personal character of another, and so I mean there's certain people who are very good at sales, and uh, we find those people for one reason or another trustworthy and credible, and we're more than willing to give them money in exchange for their services, right? I mean, high power salespeople. I'm thinking of an old student of mine who is, really really bright kid. I mean, I think he was the high school valedictorian, but he went into real estate. I mean, I think he wants to be a real estate developer. He kind of said, well, he went to college for a couple semesters and he did very well, but recognized quickly that in real estate you don't really need a college degree at all. And just because he's such a kind of sweet, he's a good-looking kid. He's very, I mean, when he tells you things, you feel he's honest and you find him credible. So, consequently, he sells houses left and right, and I think by the age of like 25, he's a millionaire. Um, All right, Aristotle continues. He says, this kind of persuasion, like the others, should be achieved by what the speaker says, not by what people think of his character before he begins to speak. And so in this sentence, Aristotle's unraveling this idea that, persuasion should occur from the actual speech itself, not from preconceived notions about what we think of the speaker. Every time we speak, we kind of have to prove ourselves when we're doing it. And it's not just our reputation, right? It's how our reputation or ethos unfolds in the moment that we're speaking, right? Not what we think of the speaker beforehand, says Aristotle. He continues. He says, it is not true, as some writers assume in their treatises on rhetoric is just another word for persuasion, that the personal goodness revealed by the speaker contributes nothing to his power of persuasion. On the contrary, his character may almost be called the most effective means of persuasion he possesses. And, just I guess a few words about that. It's like, you think of what your character is, and if you're kind of caught in certain ways, say you're being deceptive and you're called out, and you're caught in a lie, that that lowers your face in the sense that your kind of personal character is tarnished therefrom, right? And because your ethos or your character is tarnished, you're less persuasive, and it makes sense, right? I mean, uh, when people are kind of what exposed for their wrongdoing, um, it moves through time and attaches with them in a certain way. Um, and the reverse is also true. If when we're kind of repeatedly sincere and true and authentic and honest, I think people recognize that, and it carries over in time. And just like credibility can be ripped apart through malfeasance or various vice, especially lying, I think credibility can be increased and enhanced through repeated acts of honesty and authenticity. Uh, all right. Aristotle continues. He says, secondly, persuasion may come through the hearers when the speech stirs their emotions, pathos, right? We just talked about ethos, and now we're talking about pathos, right? The emotions. Our judgments when we're pleased and friendly are not the same as when we're pained and hostile. It is towards producing these effects as we maintain that present day writers on rhetoric or persuasion direct the whole of their efforts. This subject shall be treated in detail when we come to speak of the emotions, which he does in detail, but we're not going to cover here. But I will say this, uh, what a speaker does to the audience on the emotional level determines the success or failure of the speech. And there is a kind of appropriateness to the situation, an appropriateness to the situation that, when you're at a funeral, the demeanor is somber and sad. And I just went to a funeral for my good friend's mother, and it the overwhelming emotive tone was lament and sorrow, because these people were going to miss her. I mean, nobody got up and said anything rude, or there were not really many jokes or anything like that. I mean, afterwards they went and they had a beer, and well, who knows? Maybe all the raunchy stories came out, but that would be a different kind of pathos. And this idea of, what is an emotion, right? What is the difference between, say, an emotion and a feeling and a mood? Or how can we separate, uh, like, I mean, is there such a thing as a kind of true emotion, right? Is fear an emotion? Or, you know, are emotions more than just kind of chemical combinations in our brains? And all these questions, they relate in some way. This idea of pathos, they relate in some way uh, to how we feel when someone speaks. Do we like that person? Do they make us feel comfortable? Do they make us feel happy? Or do they make us feel nervous? Do they make us feel uncomfortable? Are they in some way, do they provoke us to hostility and anger? You can think of I don't know, an Adolf Hitler speech, go YouTube it, the German people after World War I were really downtrodden. This Treaty of Versailles had really hammered Germany hard, and they were very angry, and the kind of Hitlerian rhetoric, right, and his personal style too. I mean, you'd see him shouting and screaming. Well, that of course really resonated with the people, and I think the same is true for say a comedic actor. My favorite comedian is Dave Chappelle, and I just, for like the 15th time, I think I watched his Netflix special, and his ability to kind of put people in a particular state of joy, and just not just what he says, but how he says it, really resonates laughter. So okay, that's probably enough about pathos. Okay, so we talked about ethos and we talked about pathos, right? So ethos would be the character, credibility of the speaker, and pathos would be the kind of mood that's generated or the emotions, which I want to say something. I didn't say it before, but you're always in a mood, right? There's always emotions there. Uh, and so we talked about ethos and pathos, and this very brief snippet is about logos. It's about logos, and logos, as I said before, is logic, but it's also this kind of philosophical and scientific reasoning, and and the relation really between knowledge and truth, and what we recognize as true. And that's why, people with different logical abilities and people that are educated in kind of higher levels of, say, science or mathematics, uh, they kind of can think about the world differently, and they see different kinds of problems, and various answers to those problems. So all right, I'll read. Aristotle continues. He asserts, thirdly, persuasion is effected through the speech itself when we have proved a truth or an apparent truth by means of the persuasive arguments suitable to the case in question. Logos, right? And so it's very interesting. You look at the even something which seems pretty straightforward. I mean, everybody agrees that 2 plus 2 is 4, right? Nobody's going to argue about that. But you certainly will have people arguing about climate change, and you certainly have people arguing about the kind of what to do with respect to COVID and the kind of public health campaigns. I mean, some people think we should wear masks, other people don't want to wear masks, and the same is true for stuff like vaccines. So when it comes to kind of I mean, there are certain logical reasoning, uh, I mean, what the kind of apparatus or structures of one's ability, right? I mean, I think the logos question has a lot to do with like one's level of, I don't just want to say education, because there's this kind of innate or kind of natural ability. I don't want to make it seem like uneducated people can't reason, because that's not true at all. As a matter of fact, I mean, I think often, I think uneducated and ignorant are not the same thing. That's what I'm getting at. And so I'm going to read this one more time, and then I'm going to close it. Right. Just again, Aristotle argues, thirdly, persuasion is effected through the speech itself when we have proved a truth or an apparent truth by means of the persuasive arguments suitable to the case in question. Right. So another way to say this is that if you kind of recognize a truth, right, and its logical structure, if you kind of know it to be a sort of truth, you can't really argue against it. Uh, all right. There are then these three means of effecting persuasion. The man who is to be in command of them must, it is clear, be able to A, reason logically, that's the logos, B, or two, to understand human character and goodness in their various forms, right? So that like this is the sort of ethos, and I didn't say this before, but it's really critical, right? The ethos functions if the receiver thinks that the speaker has their best interest in mind, right? This idea of being a help rather than not only a hindrance, but, someone who would take advantage of the other. I mean, I think that's the problem. People, you could see, I'll repeat, two, to understand human character and goodness in their various forms. We'll see what that implies is that, uh, there could be human character and badness in their various forms, and people could harm each other and take advantage of each other, which they do. All right. And then three, to understand the emotions, right? And that would be pathos. That is to name them and describe them, to know their causes and the way in which they are excited. And I mean, so this is an invitation here to a study in psychology, a study in psychology. And let me tell you what, my friends, psychology is super interesting. Oh man, the kinds of innate motivations of human beings and why they do what they do. Oh, it's fascinating. I don't have the time to go into it here, but this whole idea of pathos, right? And knowing how to make the receiver, or having the skills to kind of, put the other into a desirable mood or an appropriate mood. I mean, it doesn't have to be happy all the time. That's not the idea. Sometimes you ought to be angry, other times you ought to be sad. And like a good rhetor or speaker, right? You think of a good preacher or a really good teacher, can really, really change uh, the people in front of them. All right, this is the last slide. Aristotle says, it thus appears that rhetoric or persuasion is an offshoot of dialectic and also ethical studies. Well, dialectic is a big word, but it just means oppositions or contraries, right? So I'm going to say this sentence again. It thus appears that rhetoric is an offshoot of dialectic or opposition, right? That we should do this. No, we should do that. It's a good thing. No, it's a bad thing. That's dialectic. And also of ethical studies. Ethics have to do with the norms that denote our behaviors. There's always something about, what we should do in the ethical. It's this idea of the right or the wrong. That's ethical studies. All right. So ethical studies may fairly be called political, right? That's why you see like the left and the right, the Republicans and the Democrats. It's a very kind of exciting time. All right. Ethical studies may fairly be called political, and for this reason, rhetoric masquerades as political science. Right? You can see there's a kind of quackery there, and the professors of it as political experts, sometimes from want of education, sometimes from ostentation or pretension or being a kind of phony, sometimes owing to other human failings. So, what Aristotle's doing here is he's saying, hey, people who are good speakers, you know, and have the skill of persuasion, they might be sleazy. They might kind of take advantage. And there's this, you got to be on the lookout. That's what he's saying here. All right, Aristotle continues. As a matter of fact, It is a branch of dialectic and similar to it, right? That would be persuasion or rhetoric. As a matter of fact, rhetoric is a branch of dialectic or opposition and similar to it, as we said at the outset. Neither rhetoric or persuasion nor dialectic, opposition, is the scientific study of any one separate subject. Both are faculties for providing arguments. So faculties kind of meaning what? Like skills or abilities or almost like repositories from which we can draw from for providing arguments, right? Think of a real, skilled lawyer, um, can, be super skilled, and that's a problem, because he could be a moral skilled lawyer, or he could, get somebody off when he really shouldn't, because he's guilty. This is perhaps a sufficient account of their scope and of how they are related to each other.